Welcome to this presentation on Nevada's Pupil-Centered Funding Plan. This information was developed in partnership with the Nevada Department of Education, WestEd, and Augenblick, Palick and Associates. This is the fifth video in the series. Other topics include an overview of the PCFP, PCFP details and calculation, revenues for education, and allowable use of funds. Section 5, Coordinating PCFP funds with other state and federal sources. Content in this section was developed in partnership with the Regions 13 and 15 Comprehensive Centers. In this section, we are going to cover how to use PCFP funds in ways that are not just allowed, but also strategic. Part of that is coordinating PCFP funds with other state and federal funding sources to provide services and programs for students. Benefits of a needs-based approach to planning. Before the PCFP, districts and schools had to manage many separate state grants with specific spending rules. The PCFP combines most of that funding into one pot to simplify resource allocation for schools. While there are funding categories such as special education and weighted student funding for at-risk, English learner, and gifted students, the main source of funding for schools has been consolidated through the PCFP into the adjusted base funding allocation, which may be used more flexibly to meet the unique needs of students. This flexibility can lead to providing students access to more coordinated and streamlined services rather than receiving multiple services from separate programs. In transitioning from a place where categorical grants define the types of expenditures to a needs-based approach to planning, district can identify the needs as the drivers for the programs and services they design and deliver. Districts then allocate the appropriate resources to implement those programs and services. The traditional approach to planning categorical funds follows a compliance-based approach in which the allowable use of funds drives the planning process. This means that districts and schools planned and implemented activities prescribed under each program or funding source, and only students who qualified for the funding were served. With the greater flexibility offered by the PCFP, districts and schools can successfully plan and allocate resources to address the needs of students by adopting a needs-based approach to planning. This allows districts and schools to better serve students with complex needs by providing access to streamlined services. Differentiate resources based on student need and not program eligibility. Reduce duplication of effort with human and fiscal resources to maximize the impact of program delivery and aid in the process of identifying resource inequities. A needs-based approach to planning encompasses three major steps: using data to identify and prioritize the needs of students and staff, developing a plan to address the needs identified, and using data to articulate explicit actions and services necessary to close identified achievement gaps, and funding the needs-based plan, using, when appropriate, braided or blended funding to allocate state and federal funds and resources to implement the plan. For example, instead of thinking about allowable uses for Title I dollars, try instead to think about what students who qualify for those funds need and could benefit from. Then focus on what resources you have available to impact student outcomes. Defining resources and availability. Typically, when people think of the resources that are available to them, they often think of people, time, and money or funding. When considering the types of investments needed to improve student outcomes and using funds to their maximum potential, leaders can consider educational resources beyond funding, such as human resources. Staff should be student-centered and qualified, experienced, and reflective of the student population, including language and cultural backgrounds. Students are often an underutilized human resource and can offer valuable insights through empathy, interview-style feedback, and self-assessments to inform what is working, what is not, and whether something is missing from the teaching and learning program. Resources also include the effective organization of time. In order to support their students and their professional practice, educators must have sufficient time to engage in professional learning, collaboration, and planning. All three of these can be structured within master schedules and school calendars to allow teachers and staff the necessary time to collaborate and align content. Resources also include a collection of equipment, materials, and supplies that enhance teaching and learning and help students achieve learning objectives. Examples might include curricular and instructional materials, such as differentiated assignments that assist students with special needs to accelerate student learning, technology such as smartboards, personal devices, and assistive technology, and hardware and software such as apps and learning tools. Programs and services, both instructional and non instructional, can be leveraged as strategies to include social and emotional learning supports, including student behavioral and physical health programs, English learner services, and special education services. And lastly, community collaboration and partnerships include leveraging external expertise to support the design of teaching and learning in a way that is reflective of the vast richness within a community. School communities are reflective of the communities they serve and should be intentional and purposeful partners to garner better outcomes for student success. Strategies to leverage community collaboration and partnership include strong family engagement, cultural programs, and leveraging community-based organizations. Structure of resources. So, how can you maximize the impact of some of these other resources? We want to make sure that we're using all of them effectively, efficiently, and economically. Here are some examples. School calendars. Incorporate professional development days into the work calendar. Modify the school calendar for absentee hotspots to ensure students are in school as many days as possible. Master schedules. Professional learning communities. These create opportunities where teachers and educators can learn from each other to strengthen Tier 1 instruction, offer time for data analysis, or leveraging instructional aids. Peer observations. These create a culture of learning and support, sharing best practices to develop and strengthen classroom management and instructional practices. Before and after school programming, they provide students for help with homework, tutoring, and other learning activities. Enrichment and summer programs, activities to add to students' learning at school, help them develop thinking and problem-solving skills, and spark their curiosity and love of learning. The equitable distribution of staff, ensuring students have access to experienced teacher, specifically at historically low-performing schools. And the multi-tiered system of support, coordinating supports for staff to be able to address both academic and social-emotional needs of students within the framework of existing MTSS frameworks can maximize the impact of programming and staff time. Resource considerations. When considering what resources to use and how best to use them, keep the following in mind. Adequacy of resources. Are the resources sufficient and of high quality to help all students meet proficiency standards? For example, if your district has adopted a new math curriculum, is it being consistently implemented across all school sites? Are there teachers who need additional professional development to ensure they're delivering the curriculum effectively and with fidelity? Availability of resources. What resources are currently in place and readily accessible for immediate use? Before investing in new software programs, review data on the usage of existing tools. For instance, if the district already has an online reading intervention tool, are teachers regularly using it? What impact is it having on student literacy rates based on the district's data? Allocation of resources. Where are the resources being provided, and are they reaching the students who need them most? For example, if your district is implementing after-school tutoring programs, are they being offered at the schools where students need the most academic support? Could transportation or scheduling adjustments increase access to these resources for families? And lastly, application of resources. How are the resources being used, and are they being utilized in the most effective way? For example, if your district has allocated funds for classroom technology, are teachers integrating these tools into daily instruction to support learning objectives? By aligning the use of resources with district priorities, like improving math scores, you can ensure they have the desired impact on student outcomes. Braiding federal, state, and local funds to coordinate services. To maximize funding provided through the PCFP, districts and schools may consider how to braid state PCFP funds with federal funds to coordinate services. Braiding involves coordinating federal, state, or local funds to implement specific programs, with each stream maintaining its identity for reporting. Federal law authorizes local education agencies and schools to coordinate and integrate federal, state, and local services when appropriate. Financing a single program using multiple funding streams is allowable, provided the activities are permitted under the grant and align with the intent and purpose of the programming. When coordinating funds, the LEA and school must maintain separate documentation showing how each fund is spent. Which funds may be braided? When considering braiding funds, LEAs can braid unrestricted state and local funds, such as the PCFP adjusted base, state funds or grants that are directed for a specific purpose, and federal funds, including title funds and IDEA. The Multi-Tiered System of Support, or MTSS framework. When coordinating funds, the LEA and school must maintain separate documentation showing how each federal fund is spent. When allocating funds to support the coordination of resources, it is helpful to organize available funding into layers that align with the various types of support services students may need. These include 3 layers: universal, supplemental, and specialized, which closely align with the programs or services that follow the multi-tiered system of support. PCFP adjusted base dollars can be used at all layers of the MTSS framework, from primary prevention to fund school and classroom-wide systems for all students, staff, and settings, to supplement secondary and tertiary prevention. Weighted funds for English learners, at-risk students, and gifted and talented students are at the secondary and tertiary prevention levels to be used for interventions for eligible students. Braided funding streams. When allocating funds to support the coordination of resources, it is helpful to organize available funding into layers that align with the various types of support services students may need. These include the 3 layers: universal, supplemental, and specialized, which closely align with the MTSS framework described on the previous slide. Universal support can be implemented with universal funds. These funds have no restrictions, can be used for anything, and are often reserved for basic program needs. Examples include the PCFP adjusted base. Supplemental support can be implemented with supplemental funds. These supplemental funds include directed state and federal funds and are intended to increase and improve program services for students and families that are historically underserved or in need of accommodation. Examples include PCFP weighted funds, local special education, and title funds. Specialized supports can be implemented with specialized funds. These funds include federal or state restricted grants and are intended to increase or expand access to program services for students who need specialized services and additional accommodations to meet individualized needs. Examples include PCFP weighted funds or local special education and federal funds such as title funds or IDEA Part B. Reading example. For example, an LEA might fund a reading skills center with PCFP adjusted base, PCFP EL and at-risk weighted funds, and Title IV-B 21st Century Community Learning Centers grant if eligible. Or an LEA might fund a paraprofessional who provides specialized services with PCFP adjusted base dollars, PCFP at-risk funds in proportion to the students served, state local special education dollars, and federal IDEA funds to support special education services, and federal Title I Part A and Title V Rural and Low-Income Schools program as eligible. Continuous improvement process. The LEA and schools should participate in a continuous improvement planning process that includes monitoring the impact of improvement activities. As part of this continuous improvement process, LEA should make a plan to evaluate the impact of resources. Leadership teams can do this by predetermining measures of success. These do not need to be limited to student achievement, but could include survey results, education or evaluation data, course participation, and more. Elements for tracking resource investments. This table illustrates one way LEAs can approach tracking resource investments. By looking at overall costs, students served, cost per student served, desired outcomes, and possible risk to success, the district can compare their predicted outcomes to actual outcomes and adjust accordingly. For example, under investments, what did we plan to invest in? And what did we actually invest in? What were the major cost factors? What resources are needed to implement this investment? And after the investment, what resources did we end up using to implement? How many students did we intend to serve? Which student groups did we intend to serve? After implementation, how many students ended up being served? Which groups benefited from this program? Was it as we anticipated? How did the budgeted amount per student compare to the actual cost per student or group served? And for both short-term and long-term desired outcomes, What did we expect? What did we get? What outcomes do we need to adjust for? And anticipated risks. Did we identify what might prevent this investment from succeeding? After implementation, what barriers existed? What adjustments did we or should we have made? Thank you for watching this presentation on Nevada's Pupil-Centered Funding Plan. This information was developed in partnership with the Nevada Department of Education, WestEd, and Augenblick, Palick and Associates.